Section 22 of Psychology, the Cognitive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ted Leinhart. Psychology, the Cognitive Powers by James McCosh. Chapter 6, The Symbolic Power. Section 1, Its Nature. By this is meant the power of thinking by means of signs or symbols, especially language. When the objects are now present and under the senses external and internal, such as the mountain before me and the joy we feel in contemplating it, we do not need any sign to enable us to think of them. We can compare these two statues without the use of words or any other medium, and decide for ourselves that the one has better proportioned form and the other has more intelligence and expression in the countenance. When the objects are absent, we need ideas of them in the mind, what I call phantasms, in order to think of them. By means of these, we can compare two statues not before our eyes. In such cases, we primarily compare the images, but these images stand for the things, say the two statues, and we regard ourselves as comparing the things as imaged. When the ideas or images are singular, we can easily think of them. We can compare them and reason about them by means of the ideas which represent them. It is thus we can discover resemblances and contrasts between Homer and Virgil, between Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, Newton and Leibniz, Locke and Kant, Washington and Abraham Lincoln, Napoleon Bonaparte and Louis Napoleon, the English, American, and French revolutions. Even when we are thinking of qualities or classes, abstract or general notions, we can do so by means of phantasms. We have occasion, let me suppose, to think of elasticity, an abstract term, and we image a rubber ball which can be squeezed, but speedily takes its original shape. We have to reason about roses, a general notion, and we make an effort to place before the mind a plant which has all the qualities of the rose without those of other plants, such as the daisy or lily. This kind of idea is much dwelt on by Locke. Quote, "Thus, in forming our idea of man, we leave out of the complex idea that which is peculiar to the individuals, that which is peculiar to Peter and James, Mary and Jane, and retain only what is common to all." End quote. Essay B. 3.3. Locke is certainly right in holding that we do endeavor to form such an idea. Farther, we do in fact think, compare, and judge by means of such phantasms. But it should be observed that these are not the same as our abstract and general notions. They are concrete and singular, and so are not the same as abstract notions, which are notions of parts or attributes of objects, or as general notions of an indefinite number of objects joined by the possession of a common attribute. In all such cases, the phantasm is used as a sign, the individual image standing for a quality which it strikingly exhibits, or for a general notion of a member of which it is a sign. We can often think correctly enough by means of such ideas. When we can do so, we move in the midst of pictures, and our thinking is rendered livelier and more interesting. Such ideas, it should be noticed, are always inadequate when considered as standing for abstract and general notions. They are concrete and present more than the abstract idea. They picture the object as well as the attribute. Bishop Berkeley exposes with great acuteness the absurdity implied in the supposition that the mind can form abstract general ideas in the sense of positive representations. Quote, "The mind having observed that Peter, James, and John resemble each other in certain common agreements of shape and other qualities, leaves out of the complex or compounded idea of Peter, James, and any other particular man that which is peculiar to each, retaining only what is common to all, and so makes an abstract wherein all the particulars equally partake, abstracting from and cutting off all those circumstances and differences which might determine it to any particular existence. And after this manner, it is said, we come by the abstract idea of man, or, if you please, humanity or human nature, wherein it is true there is included color, because there is no man but has some color, but then it can be neither black nor any other particular color wherein all men partake. So likewise there is included stature, but then it is neither tall stature nor low stature, but something abstracted from all these. End quote. Introduction to Principles. Such considerations show conclusively that the mind cannot form any just or adequate idea in the sense of image or phantasm of a class. The truth is that every image before the mind must be that of an individual, and cannot therefore fully exhibit a species or a genus. And as the notion becomes more and more general or more abstract, especially when it is of mental or spiritual objects, the representation becomes more and more difficult, and in our higher intellectual processes, it is felt to be impossible to form any picture. Who can form an idea in the sense of image, of gravitation, of law, of virtue, of expectation, of indignation, of civilization, of government? It is a mistake to suppose that we cannot think, cannot compare or reason or feel or approve or disapprove without language. It is necessary that man should first think before he can understand language. Certainly it must have been necessary for him to judge and reason before he could invent language. Man thinks primarily by means of phantasms, and these can be made to stand for higher thoughts and used accordingly. Man uses signs in the first instance to indicate his wants and to express his meaning to others. Even the lower animals, such as crows, have the capacity of using signs to announce the discovery of food or of danger to their species, and of understanding them. Laura Bridgman, without the senses of sight or hearing, had a disposition to resort to movements of the body to express her thoughts and feelings. Children are commonly disposed to ring their vocables the livelong day. Homer gives it as one of the characteristics of mankind that they are word-dividing, blank, analyzing and constructing to form a language suited to their ever-advancing thoughts, and using that language to advance their thoughts still farther. In our higher abstractions and generalizations, and in our reasonings and moral judgments, we need symbols, and especially language, to carry on our mental processes. They are as much required as figures are in arithmetic, as letters A, B, X, Y in algebra. In the first place, it would be difficult to form a mental image of 10, of 856,673, or of A over B to the second C to the third, or of personal prejudice, or benevolence, or self-sacrifice, or spiritual purity, or perfection. In the second place, these phantasms in our uneducated reasonings and recondite researches might have a confusing, a distracting, and a misleading influence as bringing objects and qualities not relevant or omitting qualities essential to the argument. In feeling his need of them and finding the use of them, man comes to carry on his thinking, to a great extent, by means of language. In this way, his thinking is abbreviated by using simple words for very complex thoughts, and can be carried on more rapidly and much farther. It should be adopted as a principle, however, that in thus using signs for thoughts, we should always be ready to translate the sign into the thing signified. In discussion, an opponent is entitled to insist on this. In recondite reasoning, in which confusion is apt to appear, we should do it for our own satisfaction, lest we be led to affirm or deny of the sign what we would never predicate of the thought or thing for which it stands. I am inclined to give the symbolic a place among the faculties of the mind. It may be difficult to determine how much of it we owe to original capacity and how much to development and heredity. It seems to me to be the product of a combination of several powers. There is in man an organic apparatus of a very flexible character and capable of producing a greater number and variety and delicacy of tones than any artificial instrument. It consists of the larynx and its attached organs, the epiglottis, ligaments, and cords. The power of association of ideas is always involved in it. The thought is associated with the sign. However produced, language is to man a natural endowment and is to be regarded as a heaven-bestowed gift. Section 2. Relation of speech to the brain. I am indebted to my former pupil, M. Allen Starr, M.D., Ph.D., for the statement in this section. It is altogether worthy of being recorded. While there seem to be local centers in the brain, there is at the same time a unity of brain action. Since speech is the embodiment of a mental act and physical vibrations, it is evident that it has both material and psychical elements. Each word which is intelligently used has been acquired by a process of education. If that process be analyzed, it may be shown that the mental basis of speech consists of a series of word images, each made up of a number of memories. Thus the word bell has its mental elements, which may be distinguished from one another as follows, and illustrated by the aid of a diagram. There is the memory of the sight of the bell, which may be called the visual memory. There is another of its tone, which may be termed the auditory memory. There is one of touch, which recalls the rough, cold surface of the metal, the tactile memory. Then the word bell, as heard, differs from the tone of the bell and is preserved in the word hearing memory. Also the word bell, as printed or written, must have been retained in the word seeing memory. Finally, there are two effort memories connected with the muscular movements involved in uttering and in writing the word. Thus the word concept, bell, is made up of a number of memories, each of which in the diagram is represented by a circle. The various memories are, however, associated intimately with one another, so that when one is aroused, the others come to mind. The circles must therefore be joined with one another by lines in the diagram, which then represents the mental elements of the word bell. The physical elements may now be considered. Each of the memory pictures of the bell is the relic of a past perception, which has been acquired through an organ of sense. The visual memory is the reproduction of a perception of sight obtained through the eye. The auditory memory is the recollection of a tone heard by the ear, and so for the other memories. Each organ of sense is a physical mechanism capable of receiving vibrations and is connected by a nerve with its own region on the gray surface of the brain, to which the vibrations are sent as sensations and in which they are perceived. In the diagram, we may therefore join the circles with a bell by lines, which will represent the nerves from the organs of sense and to the organs of motion. If the memory picture is a relic of a perception, it follows that the memory is located in the same region in which the perception occurred. But anatomy has shown that the various regions of the brain are joined with one another by nerves which run beneath the gray surface in the white matter, so that the lines joining the circles in the diagram may represent the association fibers of the brain as well as the mental connections of the memories. The diagram is therefore more in accordance with an actual arrangement in the brain than it may have seemed at first. If now I show you a bell and ask you its name, your visual memory is first aroused, then your word-hearing memory, and finally your word-uttering memory. Three distinct memory pictures rising in your mind in succession by the process of association. If, however, I merely ask you to repeat the word bell after me, I arouse but two memories in succession, one the word-hearing, the other the word-uttering. The latter, being a simpler process than the former, is found by actual measurement to require but 1/2 of the time, for the repetition of a word takes but 1/4 of a second, while the naming of an object takes about 1/2 a second. But if the memory pictures are really distinct from one another and lie in different regions of the brain, it should be possible for disease limited to one region to produce a loss of one kind of memory. And this is actually the case, for it is found that some persons lose their memory of objects so that they do not recognize them when seen. Others lose the power of understanding spoken language. Others forget how to read or write. and others still lose the power of speaking the words which they know and remember, so that there are diseases of the brain whose effect is to deprive the person suffering of a single set of memory pictures, an effect which could be represented on the diagram by obliterating one of the memory circles. And further, there are forms of disease which affect the association fibers joining different areas of the brain, in which case the association of ideas is interfered with. If, however, the surface of the brain in these cases is not destroyed, the memories remain, and it is often curious to see the manner in which they are reached by indirect association when the direct fibers are broken. All these facts point to the existence of a physical basis of speech in the brain, which corresponds, as we have seen, quite closely to the mental basis. It is an interesting fact that only one hemisphere of the brain presides over the process of speech. In right-handed persons, it is in the left hemisphere that the memories are stored, while in left-handed persons, it is the right hemisphere which preserves the mechanism. The study of diseases of memory has led to the discovery of the facts mentioned and is likely to throw much light on other mental processes now imperfectly understood. Section 3. On the teaching of languages. From an early age, children are very much dependent on symbols, as all teachers know, and especially on language for the exercise of thinking. To a small extent, this may be a disadvantage, as in the use of words they are made to think as those do who have coined the phrases and who use them. But to a far larger extent, it is a benefit, as it puts them in possession at once of the matured thought of ages. The power of speech, early practiced and going down by heredity, is a natural endowment and should be cultivated by children. I rather think, however, that young children should not be distracted by learning any other tongue than their own, which they should be taught to use correctly. But great advantages arise from people who claim to be educated being instructed in other tongues as well as their own, as they are thereby introduced to the thoughts of other peoples, and are not bound to move in the ruts which have been worn by their countrymen. A talent for languages is developed at an earlier age than one for mathematics or physics. At the age of 9 or so, a child may begin to learn Latin or French, but should not be pushed hard. In a year or two afterwards, Greek or German may be added, great care being taken not to overload the brain or to confuse the thinking. I find that a much greater number of young people from 12 to 16 or so betake themselves with more eagerness to languages than to abstract science. Advantage should be taken of this taste to have the teaching of languages commenced in childhood, and I am disposed to add completed in youth, except, indeed, when linguistic scholarship is sought, when it may have to be continued for life. If we wish to make the acquisition of foreign languages attractive, they should be learned in much the same way as our native tongue has been. There must indeed be simple grammatical rules, gathered from the passages read, taught from the beginning. But the more scientific grammatical and linguistic laws should not be insisted on till the scientific faculties have been so far matured and are ready to work. I am bound to add that when the sole education, or even the main part of it, has been in languages, the training is not favorable to independence or to solidity and manliness of thinking. When children rise to 14 years or so, scientific should be mixed with the linguistic studies if the mind is to be fully or healthily developed. Section 4. The training of the reproductive powers. I have taken pains in my exposition of the separate powers to show how they may be cultivated. It now remains only to gather the remarks to a point. The reproductive powers come next to the senses and the accompanying consciousness in the order of their appearance. They should be educated in early life in order to call forth and prepare materials for the higher powers, such as the judgment and the conscience. Exercise in memory and in language, if we follow the course of nature, should come before science, into which, as I think, some modern educators would hurry children at too early an age. Our fathers were right in exercising the memory, the apprehension, and fancy before introducing youths to the more abstract problems of science. but they often erred in burdening the mind with too many dry details or in engrossing it with words. 1. Pains should be taken to retain knowledge and all useful lessons in the mind. I have carefully explained how all this may be done. In order to this, it is needful that the teaching should be as interesting as possible, that it should engage the intellect by everything being explained and the attention being thoroughly secured. 2. It is of vast moment that the association of thoughts and feelings be properly regulated, that vice be not painted as something grand and noble, and virtue as something mean. We must not be satisfied to have youth learn by rote, that is, by the mere law of contiguity. They must lay up facts in classes and according to the relations of causes and consequences. 3. I have shown how the memory may be improved by taking advantage of the laws of association, primary and secondary. Particular pains should be taken to make children distinguish between the original and proper memories and the color which may be given and the additions made by association and by rapid inference. It is thus that we can have truth without a mixture of fiction, and what is one of the most valuable of virtues, a spirit of truthfulness. 4. A stock of images, pure, chaste, and ennobling, should be laid up in childhood and in youth, to be called up in after years in the midst of the cares of business and the lassitude of infirmity. Education should not be made too mechanical or even scientific. Children should be induced to read tales of heroism and magnanimity, to watch the aspects of nature, and to mingle in scenes full of human interest. 5. Our forefathers in some schools gave too exclusive a place to language, but it is certain all the while that language is a natural gift, that children can learn a new tongue before they can learn a science, and that languages, especially our own language, should be cultivated from an early age for the training they give and for the knowledge they open to us. There is a keen dispute in the present day as to whether language and literature or science should hold the higher place in our institutions of learning. If we are to look to the place which God has assigned to these two departments, we should give to each an equally important position, and not forget to complete the Trinity by adding philosophy or the branches which inquire into the foundation of knowledge and the reasons of things, and call forth the powers of thought and reflection. End of section 22.